All right.
All right. Great. Well, let's get started as some other folks roll in. Thank you so much for being here for our Complete Streets Conversations Designing Safer Streets hosted by Move Redmond. I want to begin our time together with a land acknowledgement. Though we are gathering virtually, we are sitting here on the lands of the Coast Salish people and the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Snoqualmie tribes. It is a first step to really acknowledge that the tribes have been here since time immemorial, and it is important to take a next step in supporting our tribes by learning more about them and supporting them and taking action like through Real Rent Duwamish. You are welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. And for quick logistics here, you are welcome to use the chat to make some comments or share some thoughts. But if you have a question that you would like our panelists to answer, please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom. And we will have a little bit of time at the end of the presentations to answer some questions. Before we begin, I want to give you a little introduction about Move Redmond. My name is Kelly Reefer. I'm the Executive Director of Move Redmond, and we are nonprofit advocates for better streets, trails, and transit in Redmond, Washington. We are really excited to bring you all together today and have this panel about safer streets. One of our top priorities in our strategic plan is to support the creation and design of safer streets so more folks feel comfortable and safe walking and biking and taking transit, as well as if you're driving, you also deserve to arrive safely. We have a few other programs and things that I wanted to share with you about. First off, in the state legislature, we are advocating in support of transit-oriented development and building more housing close to light rail and bus rapid transit. If you are interested in supporting that effort, we have an action alert that we will be dropping into the chat. It takes just a minute or so to fill out, and you can send a letter to the House of Representatives. We see transit-oriented development as a really great opportunity to address our housing crisis, to address our transportation and climate. And we have a few other programs I want to share with you. This Saturday, we are having a class at the Redmond Library, Biking 301. This is helping folks feel more comfortable riding on the roads and learning ways to feel more confident and safe biking in streets. We have a class on Saturday, May 13th, also at the Redmond Public Library on bike maintenance as a part of our Bike Month programming, where you will get to learn how to fix a flat and lube a chain, which is really super necessary bike maintenance for folks. And then finally, I just want you all to mark your calendars for Saturday, August 26th. In downtown Redmond, we'll be hosting an Open Streets Festival. It's a really wonderful community event celebrating movement, transportation, and play. There are free classes and like yoga and Zumba. There will be entertainment. We're getting some youth to come in and play music, and it's a really great time. We're currently looking for additional sponsors and vendors to come for that event. So if you're interested, you can learn more on our website. We'll drop some of those links in the chat for you all. And that is enough for me. I'm going to pass it over to our host for the panel, Maritza. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you everyone who is here with us today. My name is Maritza Laureano. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am Move Redmond's Communications and Community Engagement Manager. I'm super excited to be here today and to learn more from our amazing panelists on how we can design safer streets and how Complete Streets policy is being implemented across Washington State, and to learn more about the City of Redmond's road safety plan and level of traffic stress that will shape safer streets in Redmond. I'll go ahead and get us kicked off with our first presentation, which is from Dongho Chang, who is the State Traffic Engineer and Director of Transportation Operations Division at WSDOT. Go ahead, Dongho.
Okay, Maritza, let's see if we could. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so thank you everyone for attending and spending next hour and a half with us. really it's kind of an imperative, an important discussion that we need to have about our streets, how we design them, the laws that really dictate how they operate, and then how we enforce behavior on our streets. And you can see on the photo on the right, that's a typical street that we see all along our community. We've been very, very good at designing our roadway that provide efficiency for vehicle movement, but at the detriment of other modes, even vehicle drivers themselves. And when we continue to do this type of design approach, we exclude those in our communities that do not drive, that depend on other modes. And we know that they are harmed as a result. And we recognize that, that we need to change our approach so that it reflects our societal values. So some of the things that really dictate how our streets are laid out, operated, and revised are based on some manuals that are currently being updated, and it is a time for us to provide our input, make sure that our values are reflected in these guidelines that really highlights how things are laid on the ground. Next slide, please. Traffic fatalities are really staggering. Worldwide, approximately 1.3 million people die in car crashes, according to World Health Organization. In the United States, 43,000 people are killed each year in 2021. And we're not comparing very well to other developed nations. We are unfortunately on the high end of traffic crashes and the people who are harmed. Roadway crashes are the leading cause of death for people under age of 54 in the United States. And if you think about that number, I mean, it's pretty staggering. Next slide, please. In Washington State, we are seeing 745 people who have died in Washington State in 2022. So it's the most number of traffic deaths we've seen since 1990. Next slide. And this is in the backdrop of people traveling less with COVID and just telework that we are seeing. So it really highlights to the fact that even with less people driving, we are continuing to see higher and higher number of people impacted by traffic crashes. Next slide. And cost of inaction is incredibly high. In Washington State, the annual cost of collisions and safety is $18 billion. That's more than our other costs of our transportation network, of state of good repairs, congestion, all those impacts. And so safety is highlighted by our Secretary Millar in our focus for Washington State DOT. And we all need to recognize that, this the cost of inaction is costing society in more than what is costing in terms of the congestion or the other costs. Next slide. And we do have a chance to transform our streets and our community to really reflect our societal values. This is the first time ever where U.S. Secretary Buttigieg from WSDOT, they're leading the way. They adopted the safe systems approach. This is really exciting to have that leadership for the entire transportation system in our nation. And our manuals are going to reflect that. So the mandate is that we're going to revise our approach so that they are safe, they reflect the societal value, and that these changes we have an opportunity to review and change the way that we do our our business. And so right now on May 15th, we're anticipated to see the next update of the manual on uniform traffic control devices. That manual dictates pretty much any traffic control devices that we utilize on our streets. That hasn't been updated since 2009, so it's incredibly timely. And really the focus is to make sure that we are looking at the safety as the #1 paradigm. We're updating the design guide for all of our 50 state, how our state highways are designed, and the policy on geometric designs of highways and streets. And then we are anticipating the update to our bicycle facilities guide. So it's the guide that that's been led. The co-chair for the development is led by WSDOT, and it's going to reflect really creating the separated facilities, protected bike lanes, that is the best practice for building a comfortable bike network. Next slide. And our elected leaders are enacting and providing transformational resources and funding and changing our laws. So Move Ahead Washington, that was passed last year, is providing $17 billion of transportation funding, and it's requiring state DOT to utilize complete streets on projects above 500,000 in census designated areas. And we hear a little bit more about that. We're also updating our target 0, and we're maintaining our 2030 target. Again, this is a need for us to take action right away. There is an urgency. Next slide. And again, we as a statewide stakeholder group are recognizing that we need to revise our streets. So we have a injury minimization speed management policy, and this policy is provided for all of our local agencies to utilize. Really adopt a injury minimization and speed limit approach, so that if someone does make a mistake, that we are minimizing and the severity, the consequences of any crashes, and try to utilize, a quick approach to change the roadway characteristics. So the pictures that you see on the bottom right is West Main Street in Spokane. It's a one-way street, multiple lane through a part of a business district. And an example that could be done is a mid-block crossing with parking and access for businesses, and narrowing of the roadway so that it's much more consistent with the character of the street and the people that use it. Employ these, these thoughtful treatments, and again, really the goal is to achieve that target speed, that lower operating speed in these kind of environment where consequences really is going to be less severe. Next slide. And this is an example on Green Lake and Highway 99. And I'm going to give you several examples of implementation. This is a location where a jogger was struck, and her vertebrae were separated due to the forceful impact of that collision. It's really geared towards a different environment coming into this very vibrant community. Next slide. And with just work with the local agency, City of Seattle, one of the lanes was converted to a barrier separated bike lane. Totally transformed that area for access. It's much more comfortable to walk and bike and enjoy the most popular park in Seattle. Next slide. And doing things like this is another location just north of that Green Lake area, where a pedestrian crossing signal was put in prior to the school opening. This is something that we know we need to do, but using the criteria we may not have done in the past. And before and after studies really show the benefits, safety benefits, where we reduce the crashes at this location. from 6 crashes 3 years prior to the project to no crashes for the 16-month after, and a significant drop in injuries and crashes to the surrounding blocks, from 26% drop in all crashes to a 47% drop in injury crashes. Next slide. And really, we have to think about auroras and other auroras in our community. Are those streets really a car toys location for vehicles, or is it actually a location for people? And think about revising these locations so that we get the vibrancy and the safety that serves all users. Next slide. And we really have to think about creatively think about how our roadway functions. This is the location in Common Park in Seattle, and it's a 4-lane facility. It wasn't striped that way, but it was operated a 4-lane facility there. Park environment crossing, and it's just revising how the roadway is configured. So it's actually teeing up to an all-way stop condition, providing bicycle facilities, putting in crosswalks. Just enhances and provides that access to people accessing the park, just changes the whole character of that street itself. And we have to do more of these type of thought process and treatments in all of our locations. Next slide. And then this is a location that we see similar situations where there is no pedestrian facilities and transit access. This is the business route, West Main in Sunset Boulevard in Spokane. And during the paving project, a space that was not utilized, lanes were narrowed to create a separated pathway. A crosswalk was put in to access the bus stop. These are very simple treatments that could actually reduce the maintenance costs and provide that safe access for communities that do not drive. Next slide. And a couple examples. This is a traffic signal in Richland that was revised to a roundabout when the time was there to replace the signal. And it reduced the crashes by 85%, injury crashes by 95%. That roundabout actually created space for a multi-use path. And then if you think about the location, that's self-enforcing. Any kind of behavior that happens at, again, the interaction happens at very low speeds. Next slide. And we often think about larger vehicles in context. This is Port of Tacoma in Fife. Huge number of truck traffic in that area. A nearby signal was replaced with this roundabout. And the replacement of the signal with a roundabout actually increased the volume of traffic through the area by 6,000 vehicles. So it handles 35,000 vehicles per day. And during the peak hour, 40% of that traffic is trucks. That really the mode that needs to be handled for that port area. With that context, there's a multi-use path crossing in that area, and within this implementation, we have seen no serious injuries as a consequence. Again, just really being thoughtful about how we provide the right treatment. The tools that we utilize can have profound impact to reducing the injury level. And that is my slide, Marisa.
Awesome. Thank you, Dongho, for that amazing presentation. I was absolutely baffled when you mentioned the amount of people that have died this year in Washington State. I think that's just absolutely bizarre. And I loved seeing the implementations that are being made throughout Washington State and the huge impact that it has throughout as well. For our next presentation, we will have Celeste Gilman, who is the Strategic Policy Administrator at WSDOT's Active Transportation Division. Go ahead, Celeste.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you today. So Dongho gave a lot of great examples of complete streets projects, and just get that grounding. Complete Streets is about that whole process of planning, designing, building, operating, and maintaining our streets in a way It's providing safe access for all people using all forms of transportation, walking, biking, taking transit, driving, that it's complete. Next slide. And Complete Streets is not new in Washington. This map shows jurisdictions across the state who have adopted Complete Streets policies, cities, counties, statewide level. But what is new, next slide, as of that Move Ahead Washington package last year, Dongho referenced the new Complete Streets requirement, and that's what I'll be focusing on in my remarks here. So in that, the legislature directed us to incorporate the principles of Complete Streets in state transportation projects. This applies to all projects starting design on or after July 1st of last year that are over 500,000. And I just want to emphasize or point out, one of the features of this is that it applies to projects that there's typically some other trigger that's the reason that we're out there doing a project. So it's not prioritized by where the active transportation need. It is identified that we're out there making that public investment over $500,000, that while we're there, we're going to be correcting deficiencies in the active transportation network. Next slide. So this slide isn't, there's a little bit of a formatting issue with this slide, but I wanted to also mention, since another great part of Move Ahead Washington is there is a lot of historic levels of dedicated funding for active transportation. So in addition to what we're doing with Complete Streets, the Safe Routes to School and pedestrian bicycle programs, those grant funding sources were nearly tripled from before Move Ahead Washington. We also had the creation of the Connecting Communities program, which is currently a bill to name that in honor of Sandy Williams. And that focuses on providing active transportation facilities in overburdened communities on current or former state highways. That's $50 million over an initial 5 years. And 43 community pedestrian and bicycle projects that were specifically called out and included in Move Ahead Washington, as well as the Transportation Improvement Board has a whole set of funding programs as well, and including a Complete Streets program that has 146 million over 16 years. So next slide. Go back to Complete Streets for state transportation projects. The image there is our website, and so that's a good location to get more information. It includes our policy documents, a project delivery memo, which is a tool that we have to complement and where needed supersede our design manual, which is our primary guidance document. And so that lays out all of our policies. We're still relatively new into the implementation process. More information will get added to this website over time. And yeah, again, we're correcting those deficiencies in our active transportation system while we're stewarding our mature highway system. Next slide. So how are we approaching that? There are many projects. There are hundreds of projects across the state. We want to focus on providing those facilities in those locations where there's that higher potential for making trips within a reasonable walking or biking distance. So we'd start with that entire universe of all projects over 500,000. And we have a screening process where we look, are they in an incorporated city? Or are they in a other population center? It's not incorporated city, but has that look and feel. A census designated place has that dynamic, that development pattern that we can anticipate that there may be those trips, and where we as WSDOT have identified that there are active transportation gaps, or our local partners have identified those gaps, or where projects touch overburdened communities, recognizing that they may have been challenged to do the planning work to identify those gaps. So, so far, we have screened over 600 projects statewide with design dates starting from that commencement date in 2022 out through 2028. So this is multiple years worth of work ahead of us, and Complete Streets applies to about 40% of those projects. So talking about hundreds of projects and hundreds of communities with improvements coming. Next slide. And we have a number of goals in how we're approaching Complete Streets implementation. Really critical is that partnership with communities. In many cases, we're looking at making the kinds of changes that communities have been asking for a long time. And I've heard it again and again from my colleagues of how exciting and what a relief it is really to be able to respond to those needs now and have the support and the framework to do so. And sometimes there will be trade-offs and challenges, and so it's really important that we're looking at adding facilities. We do that collaboratively with communities, and that we are going to be, the goal is to be eliminating those active transportation gaps as a baseline need for projects. So that adding facilities for walking and bicycling is at that same level as the other need that was triggering that project. And so providing those facilities then becomes incorporated into that project budget. And in keeping with that safe system approach Dongho was talking about, that making sure that where speeds are in excess of 30 miles per hour, that we're providing separation from drivers. And we have a goal of providing facilities for walking and biking that provide a level of traffic stress of 2 or better. Next slide. So this slide kind of gives a snapshot indication of the different levels of traffic stress. And this is the metric that has gained a lot of traction nationally, and that we have adopted as part of our statewide active transportation plan. And if you are not familiar with our active transportation plan, stopped in 20, is multiple award winning and has really laid the foundation for us in now implementing the Complete Streets requirement. And that level of traffic stress 2 or better, that it's both about providing facilities that are in keeping with that safe systems approach that we're looking at, reducing crash exposure and reducing speeds and the associated kinetic energy associated with them. It's also about mobility, because you can move a lot more people in a given amount of space if they're bicycling or walking than you can if they're driving in a car. Cars are they're the most wasteful of space option for moving people. So if we can provide facilities that really invite people to walk and bicycle in a space, that we can also move more people in that space. Next slide. So this then is the slide for the pedestrian level of service. And again, those different levels and providing those facilities that are going to be welcoming and for most users. Next slide. Another key piece here and on the same themes as Dongho was talking about in the examples he was given, we're putting emphasis on looking at the space that we already have and using it differently, that we can take space. In many cases, we have wide lanes or excess vehicle capacity that we can consider, and this has not been the norm in many cases in the past, but that clear direction that we can consider those trade-offs, can consider reducing vehicle level of service, can consider that potential for mode shift. And really it's about creating balance across the whole system. Next slide. And with that more balanced, equitable and resilient transportation system, we can have that potential to move more people, do so more safely with less greenhouse gas emissions, and really create those thriving communities, contribute to thriving communities. Oh, with that, next slide, and over to Zach.
Awesome. Thank you, Celeste. I loved seeing the images of the level of traffic distress. I personally would love to see one be implemented a lot more, but like I am okay with two as well, honestly. But yeah. And for our next panelist, we will have Zach, who is the Principal Multimodal Planner at Washington State Department of Transportation with the Management of Mobility Division. Go ahead, Zach.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Really happy to be here today to talk about complete streets in King and Snohomish counties. I think we've talked a lot about the legislative intent behind the complete streets requirement. I wanted to give you a little peek under the hood to see how we're implementing. So as Celeste mentioned, we started this work back in July when the legislation issued the requirement on complete streets. And since then, we've been working through a backlog of projects that apply from that July 1st start date. And this is kind of the model for how we do it in King and Snohomish counties. We have screened 72 projects. We're actually a little bit overrepresented for complete streets projects in our region. We, with over half of our projects applying, have some complete streets requirement attached to them after the screening process. We've met as a team of designers, engineers, planners to talk about how we can adapt these projects to the complete streets intent to reach LTS2, and are just beginning our community outreach on some of the projects where complete streets applies, and we have project engineering start dates that are coming up soon. So So at some point in the future, all 6 of these steps will be represented. We'll have projects at all 6 of these stages going on. But for right now, we're just kind of dipping our toes in at step 3 and moving forward there. So yeah, a lot more work to come, but of course, not all projects are created equal. So the next slide. The way we prioritize getting through all those project screenings and complete streets analyses was by trying to front load our work with what we thought were simpler projects. WSDOT, like all state agencies, is responsible for any of the stream beds and culverts that travel under their right of way as part of the fish passage program in our state. We have about 1,500 or we did have about 1,500 last year of these culverts and stream beds that were found to block upstream fish habitats, and it's WSDOT's responsibility to correct that through capital projects. And as Celeste mentioned, anytime we're out there improving our right-of-way, we need to be analyzing for the complete streets requirement. So a lot of these are pretty simple. They're point-to-point perpendicular to the roadway. And because of the size of the project and the cost of the project and the location of the project, a lot of them, complete streets didn't apply. But in some cases they did. Now, I'm sure when you think of some of the images we saw earlier about complete streets with people biking and walking, and then you see something like this, this is SR 516 in Kent. This is what, 20 feet long? We're not going to build 20 feet of bike lanes or widen the sidewalk for just 20 feet and call that complete. But at some point in the future, SR 516 is going to need repaving, or maybe it'll need some other kind of improvement. WSDOT will be out there doing that work. Whatever replacement structure we put in here to correct for the fish passage obstruction needs to be what we're calling forward compatible. So what we don't want to have happen is for our designers to build something here that's great for fish, but then 5, 10, 15 years from now, when we come in and repave, we have to tear it out because it's too narrow or would otherwise conflict with reaching LTS2. So that's a bit tricky. I know I said that fish passage projects are a little bit simpler, but sometimes they're not. In fact, this one is a good example of that. You can tell just by looking behind that minivan that there's not another side to this culvert. In fact, the culvert goes under the roadway, turns left and goes through that parking lot and connects to a stream kind of on the other side of that in some green space. So we have an opportunity here to look a little bit more closely and say, is there an opportunity to improve the crossing here? How do we design for forward compatibility when we've got this kind of underground dogleg? And now as we start with the coordination with other agencies, we're beginning to have these conversations of, what are the designs of the and plans for this area by our partners. So the city of Kent, for example, has some plans to actually extend some trails and paths from the park I mentioned through that parking lot. So is there an opportunity for us to collaborate there as we're doing our fish passage work? King County Metro is opening their I-line, rapid ride I-line along this corridor. They're going to widen the sidewalks on the south side of this corridor and add a bus only lane. At least that's the current plan. So how do we coordinate with them on the timing, the structure, everything that's needed to make both those projects deliver on time and meet the LTS2 expectation of complete streets and meet all our operational needs of all the partners. So those are conversations we're having now. Once we screen through all the fish passage projects, we can go to the next slide. What we're left with is more complex projects. A lot of our projects are pavers, basically exactly what it sounds like. We're repaving long stretches of our state routes. This is SR 99 in Edmonds. And we have a project here that extends from this location further north into Linwood, into unincorporated Snohomish County, and into Everett, actually. So it's pretty long. We're going to need to do a lot of coordinating. And I think, Celeste and Dongho both alluded to the fact that, this, like many of our state routes, have been designed for vehicle traffic and not for pedestrians and cyclists, not for all ages and abilities. I look at that intersection and would feel nervous crossing that. As an able-bodied adult person, I think about my daughter or an elderly relative and just think this is not designed for them. So how do we reach LTS2 on that? How do we unwind those design decisions? That's a big lift, and it's going to take a lot of coordination with our partners. There's also Community Transit's Swift Blue Line, which will be running along this corridor and will be a critical connection to the light rail expansion in Linwood. So we need to think about all the users of this corridor. Pedestrians and cyclists often become transit users. They walk to their bus stop or bike to their bus stop in order to access that transit, and we need to think about their needs as well. So you'll see that there's a transit stop there on the northeast corner there. Yeah. So one other thing, can we pop back to that slide? That's our 99. Great. Yep, there. Just one other thing, speaking of partners, these are, you'll see there are driveways and other land uses along this corridor. There are a lot of, as Dongho's picture showed with the car toys, there are a lot of car dealerships and car specific businesses along this corridor. They're going to be interested in how people access their business. So driveways and what we call managed access is going to be an important part of this conversation as well. One other thing I'm thinking about, and it's early now to think about this, but this ends up being a total of about 10 miles of SR 99. And navigating that as a pedestrian, you probably would not spend the whole 10 miles, but conceivably, if it was really well appointed for a cyclist, someone might use a significant stretch of that on a bicycle. Can we provide a consistent bicycling experience throughout? Can the cross section of the roadway be as similar as possible throughout the entire length of the project? Or can we provide signage that really helps people feel like, as a cyclist, as a pedestrian, I'm never left out to dry. I'm never just biking along and suddenly the lane ends or the sidewalk ends. So those are also things that we're thinking about. Okay, next slide. So this is our community engagement model. As I mentioned, we're kind of just getting started on this. In fact, one of our first meetings with a city jurisdictional partner is tomorrow. And that's what this model is based off of. A lot could change here. We hope that when we reach out to our partners, they recognize this opportunity to make improvements for all users and find ways to collaborate and meet the needs that are identified in their plans and projects as well. But there may need to be more iteration on some of these steps, more back and forth on designing alternatives and so forth. And that puts pressure on WSDOT too. We have a very robust project delivery system at WSDOT, and we have to recognize that implementing some of these changes puts pressure on that. So, but at the same time, we're dedicated to planning with our partners, not planning for them. So we want to make sure that we're not arriving in your town or towns like it and saying, this is what you're going to put in here. You're going to build bike lanes or sidewalks that it's with. No, we want to find what works for your community, and that takes time and discussion and open-mindedness, and that's what we're trying to bring to this. But the other thing that I just want to point out that I think is kind of new for WSDOT is that Complete Streets is really integrated in the design process, and planners are integrated in the design process that in a way that's I think that's an exciting step forward. We have a concurrence requirement for Complete Streets at different design milestones, and that's that's going to be an exciting change. So next slide. So there's some other considerations we should make, or I should mention about Complete Streets. As was mentioned, this is a statewide program. And so we're a big state and it applies in all the different contexts, rural, urban, coastal, what have you. I work with 6 other regional leads and a Complete Streets lead at Washington State Ferries rather. And we have an interesting task. We want to be consistent. We're trying to apply a statewide policy, but we also want to be flexible enough to tailor the context of this program to the communities where we're working. Next slide. My division, Management and Mobility, we also conduct corridor studies. It's another acknowledgement alluding to some comments made earlier about how our highway system has been designed to, primarily to move vehicles in many cases. But some of these corridors have become really critical pathways for connecting communities and connecting people and housing with jobs and education opportunities. We conduct corridor studies and look at where those corridors have gaps. Traditionally hasn't been about LTS2, but it does look at pedestrian and bicycle gaps. It's the kind of work we do to conduct a corridor planning study is remarkably similar to what we need to do for that SR 99 project in Edmonds and Linwood that I showed you earlier. So we're trying to synthesize those things. We also conduct highway master planning processes that's typically at the direction of the legislature. The picture on the right here is SR 167. That master planning process is underway, and it's being developed to be integral to Complete Streets and to bring some of those Complete Streets principles to bear on it, so that when the time comes to make improvements, we've already done a lot of the groundwork about meeting the legislative intent. Next slide. Comprehensive planning updates. These are required by the State's Growth Management Act. Management and Mobility Division at WSDOT has begun taking a more active role in reviewing comprehensive plan updates in the Central Puget Sound. So part of this review would involve identifying future Complete Streets projects, suggesting Complete Streets policies if none are present, but really looking for those opportunities to collaborate, because I think, next slide. Right now, for City of Redmond, we don't have any projects on SR 202 or SR 520 that where Complete Streets applies, but we will. And we'll be needing to work with the City of Redmond and our partners to understand their planning needs and to understand their visions for the future of transportation. This is a street that, SR 202, just east of the 520 interchange. We'll need to look at the environment and the existing conditions. There's a bike route just to the left on the other side of those Jersey barriers. There's a new sidewalk going in. At a certain point, we might come across a project that already meets LTS2 requirements. But I think at this point, we're going to want to have conversations with our jurisdictional partners, especially in the City of Redmond. I think we're really looking forward to seeing how their Complete Streets ordinance can help us collaborate and find efficiencies. So I think that's my last slide, where there's a slide with some information, just a link to the page that Celeste shared earlier. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. I really enjoyed that presentation. I actually have crossed the road in that little SR 99 image that you've showed. I've used my bike there and crossed that intersection there. And I can guarantee that, yes, that little section there is pretty scary to walk around and bike around as well. So I'm like super excited to see how Complete Streets is going to change a lot of intersections all throughout Snohomish County and King County and just all throughout Washington in general. So I'm like super excited how all of that is going to go forward. And also, just as a quick reminder to everyone, feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A section as well. We will be doing Q&A at the end as well. And for our last panelist, we will have Banji Garcia, who is the Transportation Planning and Engineering Manager at the City of Redmond. Go ahead, Banji.
Thank you, Marissa. And if I couldn't ask for a better lead up to my slide. So thank you, Dongho, Celeste, and Zach. I just want to let everybody know that we didn't coordinate this ahead of time. So I'm letting everyone know that the city is currently undergoing a transformational update to its comprehensive plan, Redmond 2050, which is a foundational document that articulates goals, objectives, policies, actions, and standards that guide city decisions. The Transportation Master Plan, otherwise known as the TMP, is a functional strategic plan that guides transportation investment and activities to support the comprehensive vision. For example, the 2013 update incorporated the capital investment strategy to support the preparation for the light rail. Next slide. The initial community engagement for the TMP began in 2020. The guiding principles and the strategies that were developed from the community feedback helped frame the policies in the transportation element in Redmond 2050. This is the backbone of what will be behind the projects, programs, and policies in the updated TMP. Next slide. So my team, the Transportation Planning and Engineering team, will be updating the TMP through a series of separate but coordinated pieces of work. As the city is transitioning from a suburban city to an urban city, it is important to facilitate understanding of concepts that may be new or challenging to understand. All these bodies of work are being done together and coordinated, so they can stand alone because it might take a while for that new updated TMP to be finalized. Next slide. The city is working on a community engagement tied to the Transportation Master Plan right now. For the past decade or so, the city has been preparing for light rail, and now it is almost here. You can see it with your own eyes as you're driving around or riding your bike or walking around. My team is conducting this particular Routes to Rails is asking the question, if you were going to get to light rail, how would you get there? The routes you would choose. Based on community input, we hope to identify priority routes to the stations for biking and walking, as well as opportunities for improvements. These 4 stations, it is not a surprise, hopefully, to many of you that parking is might be a challenge. And so what the outcome of this engagement is to focus on people not driving. Over 160 unique comments have been received in this first phase. So I think that's pretty amazing in just 2.5 weeks. And that doesn't include all the people that showed support by liking other people's comments. The next step will be to come up with priority routes from the feedback and potential pilot project suggestions. Next slide. The city is also developing a local road safety plan, which is a proactive data-driven approach, first looking at collision data and looking for trends in roadway and infrastructure. The trends will be discussed as well as the countermeasures to address them. The result will be a prioritized list of safety projects specific to the needs of the city. Next slide. The first step in the local road safety plan process is looking at the last 5 years of crash data to identify contributing factors, common circumstances, and/or locations and transportation system characteristics that contribute strongly to all crashes in Redmond, especially those with severe outcomes. The maps on this slide display the data we have available at the moment. These maps will be updated to include up to 2022 later this year. This analysis helps identify high priority risk factors. Next slide. This is a snapshot of a much larger spreadsheet of crash data. Looking closer at the data, in addition to posted speed limit and other environmental factors, provide a way to look at the data with a new lens. A preliminary look at the data provided by WSDOT seems to highlight the following risk factors: head-by crashes in marked crosswalks, signalized intersections, 30 to 35 mile per hour roadways, and two-way divided roadways. Next slide. The city will be updating the 2016 bicycle design manual to incorporate bicycle level of traffic stress and become more user-friendly so it can be used more as a reference document during the project development phase. Next slide. The manual that we have already has the city's current standards that include bicycle facilities that people have already been requesting. This update will be focused on filling any gaps in treatments or facility types the city is interested in implementing, and to address some of the more situational challenges like transitions in and through a busy intersection and matching new facilities to existing ones. Hopefully now with some of the new projects in design and in construction, the update will include local examples in the manual. Next slide. There is a lot of work ahead for the Transportation Master Plan that my team has envisioned. This is why we are working on the pieces that can stand alone when they're finished. Ultimately, the progress forward will be limited by resource capacity and engagement with the community. Next slide. But how can you all be involved? Oh, I think that we can always send out the link that can look at the formatting on that. That's the link to our Let's Connect page for the TMP, which is right now the best page to keep updated on everything that's going on. Since we're moving to the next phase of the Routes to Rails community engagement, I want to give a shout out to that. There's going to be a future engagement for our local road safety action plan, probably in the summer. But we also have always had an active pedestrian and bicycle advisory committee that meets monthly. So feel free to email me if you'd like to be on the mailing list and to come to a meeting. And that is the end of my slides.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanjie, for that amazing presentation. We are going to go ahead and do our Q&A as well, starting with our first question, which is, how will we use the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in furthering Complete Streets work, and what other funding is there that will fund this work?
I can speak for a little bit for Redmond that the city, in coordination with a few other local jurisdictions, received some of the funding because we applied for an action plan grant for the Safer Streets for All. So that's part of some of the money that we're getting.
I can speak to that a bit in the Complete Streets context. So I touched on that for projects that are subject to the Complete Streets requirement, the way that that's been set up by the legislature is that requirement applies to our projects, whatever the triggering reason is that we have a project there, so that those facilities, those needs become incorporated into the project budget, whatever the source of funding may have been for that project. It doesn't create specifically a new pot of funding, and there are certainly a lot of pressures on the funding that we have our preservation for our system has been chronically underfunded. So having at this point, we don't have a specific the Infrastructure and Jobs Act tie in, but it opens up those opportunities for additional funding, and really excited to have that focus at the federal level and strong alignment with what we're trying to accomplish here in Washington, and those opportunities as well for approaching that as a partnership with local jurisdictions. And there's some questions about level of traffic stress and having a target of 2 or 1, and that also kind of connects in their level of traffic stress. Some cases we will be able to accomplish that with a similar footprint and sort of level of expense. In other cases, that would require expanding right-of-way, property acquisitions, additional costs that we may not be able to make in the trade-offs that we're navigating as we're delivering complete streets as part of preservation projects or fish passage projects. But if we are able to have a partnership with the local jurisdiction, then you get that next increment on and be able to reach that level of traffic stress with the project.
Awesome. Thank you, Celeste. And I see Kate Than has her hand up, and I'm going to allow you to go ahead and ask your question. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Oop, all right. I think that was a slight mistake on her end. That's okay. No worries. All right. I know some of the questions have already been answered in the chat, but I just want to go out ahead and just have for everybody to listen on to those questions and answers as well. Question from Sue is, I assume that persons using mobility devices are included in pedestrian design. Are there any design conflicts today versus past issues, such as sidewalks width and crosswalks?
Yeah, so in the past, our funding for state transportation project did not include pedestrians and bikes. In most instances, it has to be used for highway purposes. And now with the Move Ahead Washington explicitly saying that we need to provide ADA improvements and provide comfortable, safe bike and pedestrian facilities, it addresses that. The other thing that's happening right now in the national level, even the discussion on the manual and uniform traffic control devices, if you think about that being a force of law, you have to use that. Having pedestrian signals and crosswalks is not a requirement to put in a signal, and that's something that we all need to be like advocating and really be outraged about. If you think about a location that doesn't have a pedestrian signal and you're relying on a vehicle green to cross, what happens to someone who doesn't have visibility, who has vision loss, right? They are not able to utilize that, and so the way that the manual is written, it actually excludes and is actually in violation of ADA. And when we are speaking as practitioners and part of that committee trying to make changes, we get the pushback that says, no, we don't want to, from others that that's not a priority for their agency. And we all have to speak out and say, no, that's a fundamental need and you have to address it. So it's really critical that we all pay attention and we advocate for making sure all of our facilities are included.
Awesome. Thank you, Dongho.
I could just add on to that, for complete streets requirement specifically talks about ADA accessible sidewalks. And we have a long-standing program as part of our ADA transition plan of providing curb ramps at intersections, but in many cases that was what was done, was the ramp. And now with complete streets, we're going to connect those so that it is actually a usable facility.
Awesome. Thank you, Celeste. For our next question, we have Damian Gaydon. I know it was also answered in the chat, but just wanted to bring it out as well. It's transportation planning often seems to presume continual growth in automatic traffic volumes, which is used to justify preserving or even expanding fast multi-lane roads that are proven dangerous. Are there efforts to change tendencies and make reducing traffic volumes both a safety and climate supporting goal?
And I think that's the change in the transformation that we need to have. The traditional practice has been using vehicle-centric metrics to design and operate our roadways, and we have to change that to a more of a, what is the mode share, changing from a continual growth of vehicles to how you want the facilities to be, and what are the modes that you want to prioritize. And so the discussion that's happening in our state, right now, there's discussion on reconnecting our communities, South Park, right? Discussing Aurora and Highway 99, and how that roadway currently doesn't really work for all users. It's really a paradigm shifting discussion. It's where we decide if the most efficient way to and the most valuable way for us to have that street function is that local access and freight delivery movement of buses for our longer range travel modes, then we have to change the roadway profile so that it handles that. So is having that level of discussion, right, really going away from, and Damian is absolutely right. The reason why we are at this point where we can't maintain a lot of our facilities is because we use that old paradigm and we overbuilt our facility, and it's not sustainable.
And add a couple additional things on to that. One of the things that we're working on right now, we have a proviso from the last legislative session on VMT reduction. We have had goals at a statewide level since 2008 for VMT reduction, vehicle miles of travel reduction. And the work we're doing right now is looking at how those targets could be set at a more local scale, at a regional scale, and supportive actions to meet those targets, estimated costs associated with that, potential changes. We've been directed by the legislature to identify potential changes in rules and laws that would support meeting those VMT reduction goals. So we have a couple of interim reports that have already been published, and the final report for that will be published this June. And the governor's budget includes funding for continuing that work and starting to pilot it with interested regions. If the climate element bill passes the legislature for the Growth Management Act, that has a lot of emphasis on reducing vehicle miles of travel. So those are some examples of efforts that are going on or potentially on the horizon here in Washington State. And I also wanted to mention at the national level, I chaired a NCHRP project, 1036. It's developed a guidebook for cross-section reallocation, and really taking very detailed and but accessible approach to working through those trade-offs and kind of daylighting decisions and raising the floor on safety and ensuring that all modes will be provided for. So I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Can I add what to Celeste and what Dongho just basically said is that I think the movement in the transportation industry in the state and actually our whole country is that at all levels, you know, at the citywide level, county and the state, we are all working better together for all modes. And so it's complicated because now it's more of not just complete streets. I would probably rename it to be like complete networks, because unfortunately, we're working on projects at a time when we're designing it, but that's why we're working at the comprehensive level, the plan level, and at the big planning citywide level, because you know, the cities have to be prepared when we're working on the projects that align with the state routes, that if we can't fit that bicycle facility, where are people going to go? Because that's the answer that's the conversation we'll have to have. So if cities haven't started having that conversation, I'm going to guess that they probably will. If there's been a lot of movement in so many places, and Redmond currently has a council that is very motivated to have movement forward in this area.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanjie. We have about enough time maybe for like one more or two more questions. Let's see. There's for the next question is from Ben Austin, which is Washington State's Transportation Improvement Board is updating the project selection process for its Complete Streets program. Any big highlights?
I can provide some background. So I just joined the TIB board for Washington State, and this will be my third meeting. But I did ask the staff about the Complete Streets as part of the and safety as part of the project selection guide, and so it is incorporated. So I don't know if anyone knows Andrew Beagle. He formerly with WSDOT and then with City of Olympia, a very, very thoughtful, progressive engineer. And I'm going to see if we can get some of that update published. But yes, there's a significant change in, Complete Streets was always part of the TIB program, but it's emphasizing more on the safety aspect of it. So there's some of the project selections that I've been involved with really highlights the multimodal and accessibility.
And I can just add on briefly for the Complete Streets grant in specifically TIB is looking at changes to help with scaling, so more grants and making sure that is well integrated in with all of the grant programs. So I think there'll be some good changes coming.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think we have enough time for just one more question, which is just a quick one. Probably not a priority development, but can anything be done to widen bike lanes or add sidewalks on roads in the woods close to urban areas?
So that's a great question, and we have places around the state where there are multiple towns or communities that aren't contiguous but are close enough together that there would be a reasonable bicycle ride. You can get a long way on 2 wheels in particular, or 2 feet, or 4 wheels, human powered. So that is not our focus for the Complete Streets implementation. There's so many needs across the state, and we do need to prioritize that we're focusing in those populations, in centers, in those places with that higher potential for shorter trips. But another thing that there's conversations around more extensive trail planning around the state, and we'll see what does or doesn't get funded out of this legislative session, but there may be more on the horizon, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you, Celeste. All right, that wraps up our Q&A. Before I pass it on to Kelly, thank you again to all our amazing panelists and for the amazing presentations that you all gave today. And I wanted to give you the chance if there's anything else that you wanted to share and any final thoughts.
Well, I think Redmond is definitely on the cusp of transformation. There, light rails coming in. That what I'm witnessing, with the interest in the community activism, Vanjie, what you're showing with the update to the transportation plan, it is we are all aligned. I think it's going to take a little while to revise some of our old infrastructure to really remove some of those barriers and get our communities back to where it needs to be. And it's going to require all of us to be vigilant and really be involved, advocate, and be a partner and be a part of the solution. So I'm really excited for what's happening in Redmond.
This is such an exciting time to be doing this work. Over the course of my career, I've seen a tremendous shift in the approach that's being taken, and so urgent, so needed. And it takes, as I was saying, it takes a while to get from idea to constructed facility. It's taken us many decades to get to the state we have now. It's going to take time to transform that, but the pieces are well aligned. The momentum is building, and we need people to do the work. That is what makes this potential real. And WSDOT is hiring many positions. There will be many more. But please sign up for the WSDOT jobs. You can get email notifications, apply, work with us, work with your local communities. There's this. It's an exciting time, and encourage you all to be a part of it. And thank you for being here and being a part of it.
Awesome.
Not much to add, but I was just going to say, very similarly, when I was back in grad school at UW, and we learned about complete streets, read about complete streets, they were just this kind of concept at the time. Like, you could only see them in new development or in greenfield that was being turned into new urbanist places. And now here we are really trying to make this happen at a state level. So I echo Celeste's call for people to think about WSDOT as an employer. And in your community, there's lots of opportunities to make your voice heard and participate in the public process. And that's an important piece of this too. So thank you.
Well, I'm just going to have to add my thing since everybody else said something. Just a little plug again, the Routes for Rails engagement, just to keep engaged. And as my team has been reviewing what has come in, it is actually an exciting time to be in transportation. I think all of us who on the panel have been doing this for a while. So I think alignment is the perfect word. You know, Metro, WSDOT, Sand Transit, everything is about comfort and accessibility, and just really the people using these infrastructure that we're building. So it's the people moving, and that's been transportation's goal this whole time. It's getting people to where they want to go, and hopefully it's not only through cars. So thanks everybody, and there's just a reminder that there's a pedestrian bicycle advisory committee for Redmond.
So thank you. I'll pass it on to Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined in this webinar. For Move Redmond, it's really important to get out the information about safer streets, and that it really does come down to the kind of design that we have and the safe systems approach that really will make our streets a more welcoming and safe place for people to get around and really get where they need to go. So again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone for joining today. I want to invite you to follow along with Move Redmond. We have our social media and our newsletter as a really great way to stay in touch with all of the programming and events and things that we have coming up throughout the year. And again, this is a free webinar, and we have a bunch of free programming that we offer, and we encourage you to donate to support this work. It takes a lot of time to follow and make transportation advocacy happen, and we really hope that you will join us in this collective kind of group effort to make our streets safer for everyone. Thank you again so much for coming. And just to let you know, we will be able to share out a recording of this webinar, as well as we can share out those slides to everyone who registered for the webinar as well. There will be other resources available on our website. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and I hope you have a really wonderful spring day. Thank you.
Thank you.